Delighted to be here with all of you. Feel honored. Know full well that there are many other families that could have, probably should have been invited before us, but we'll go with the flow. As was already mentioned, we moved here in the area in 1966. We lived on a farmhouse or in a farmhouse over near Boyd's on just off of 28. Then we moved back, if you will, into Poolsville and lived in a house owned by Charlie Elgin. You all know that name. That name will probably come up later on tonight. He was a mayor and I think the postmaster at that point. And then eventually we moved out to our home that we built on Whites Ferry Road, where we bought a piece of land by the name of, from a man by the name of George Butler. That name will for sure come up later. So with that kind of kickoff here, Reva has already said a few words, but I don't want to monopolize even the kickoff. So what do you want to say about yourself? You're up. Go ahead.
Well, I enjoyed it when we lived in Poolsville, and I had my business, and all the kids went to school here and everything, so I felt like home when we came back to visit. Hi. That's enough.
Okay, and what did your shop do?
We sold crafts and had lessons. And
where were you at various times? I see you were on the second floor of a building. What's that building called? Anyway, you had several locations, including where Kaleva is operating now for many years, right?
Main place wasn't.
Yeah. So those were good years, right?
Yes, very.
Dad mentioned that we moved here. We actually came out here twice from Illinois. I actually didn't have all of my high school career. I never went to elementary school in Poolsville. I actually went only for a few years of the senior high school, which it was at that time, and then graduated from Poolsville High School. But he mentioned that he bought property from George Butler. George Butler is a farming family. George was a third generation farmer. His daughter, Franny, became my wife. I met her in Poolsville High School my junior year. And when I was going to graduate that next year, my senior year in 1972, I told Dad, because he was looking for some property, that Mr. Butler was getting to the point where he was not able to take care of the farm anymore and wanted to sell the farm. So Dad talked to him and they worked on an agreement, and Dad bought 6 acres of the corner of what used to be George Butler's farm. So kind of ironically, and kind of the way Poolsville is, I guess, and the old Poolsville was anyway, my dad actually lives on what used to be a part of the family farm that my wife's family had for many, many generations. So kind of an ironic thing. Dad, when he bought the property, next door to him was a small shack. It really was just a wooden shack. It was a house that was owned by a guy named Lemuel Graham. Lemmy Graham. He worked on the Butler farm, and it had no water and no electricity. And Lemmy has passed away a few years later, and his grave is actually in the Martinsburg Cemetery, which, as you know, is a historically Black church. And I actually found the gravestone. I was working with some of the men from the Hosanna Worship Center, which used to be part of the Martinsburg Church, and we found his headstone there. So again, kind of a small community. Dad, did you want to talk about when we first moved here, though, and when you looked for a house, and we talked to the Jamesons. They were about the only realtor in those days. When we moved here, the town was about 350 people when we first came out here. there were no developments. It was way before the development started in Poolesville. And it wasn't until much later in 1973, in that range, when they started making some houses in Poolesville, including Westerly and Westmont. Ironically, I was at college in Wisconsin. When I came back in 1973, I wanted to get a job and I wanted to do outside work. So I actually got a job building houses in Westmont. I didn't know a thing about construction. And some of you may remember that development where Westmont is now. There used to be a big barn there out in front and actually right on Fisher Avenue. That barn was part of that dairy farm that used to be there before that development, Westmont, was built. And when I went into get that job, the guy that hired me said I was going to be doing essentially, lifting wood and, laboring stuff. But they found out that the dairy farm had a lot of swampy ground on the back of what is now Westmont. So I ended up spending the whole summer putting sump crocks in the basements of houses that were poured already, because as soon as they built the house and the foundation, they found water in the basement. That was in the back of that old farm. So that, and some of that later on, as you probably know, later on, they started to have some flooding in some of those houses. That was part of that same old swamp that was back there where the farm used to be. So there were no shopping centers, as you know, in those days when we moved here. The Selby's did have their store. It was right on the main street in Poolesville. It was unfortunately torn down later, but at the time it was there. And I remember going in with mom and dad to Selby's because they had clothing and they also sold shoes, including Red Ball Jets. And I got my first basketball shoes, Red Ball Jets, when I was in 7th grade in Selby's at the store there. Mr. Selby, the older Selby, not Roy Jr., the younger Selby, was actually always in the back of the store next to the meat counter. He had a stogie in his mouth all the time. And he was always just sitting there chatting with 3 or 4 other men around him, like an old general store used to be, back in the day. And Mrs. Selby was usually up front somewhere. She was a shorter woman, always around the cashier up front of the store. So it was really like a general store, even in the time we moved here in Poolesville in the mid 1960s.
Even after they located their store to the bigger facility, which is now Tractor Supply, of course, that was a social center for a lot of people in the community. You go around in the aisles and you'd see 3 or 4 people chatting here and there everywhere. So it was quite a good socializing institution in the town, I think.
There were gas stations that were owned by names like Kohlhaas, who was that family had been in Poolesville for a long time. Where Poolesville Tire and Auto is, it was owned by Kohlhaas, Charlie Kohlhaas. Charlie Glass owned the gas station on the corner of Poolesville, and Charlie's still here. He lives across from the Poolesville Memorial Church right now. A guy named D.D. Dietrich, and before him, a guy named Stanley Umstead owned what's today the Poolesville Liberty. So we had gas stations, but they were all pretty much locally owned in those days. And Jameson's obviously owned the Liberty, so they own it locally. But other than that, it was all local guys, and they all had repair stations in their gas stations as well. And next to Selby's was White Store, which became a store that mom actually had one of her shops in on the ground floor, is where she had her second shop after she moved from her first shop. Where Bassett's is today was a post office, and Titus's Tasty Cupboard. Joan Carroll, who's on the call here, is in the Titus family, so she knows a lot about that. But I remember walking in there in those days, and there was 4 or 5 tables, homemade pies. You didn't have to worry about reservations because there was never an overcrowded place there. It was always just a few people in there because it was a small town, so you could get a meal anytime you wanted to. And believe me, it was a really great meal too. Right up the road was Staub's Restaurant. It's no longer there, but where the Colony is today on the corner of 28 and 109, it used to be Staub's restaurant. It was another great little restaurant. I think some of the best chipped beef I ever got was in Staub's restaurant. And then there was Meadowlark Inn, which used to be in what is today AHOP. And believe it or not, they were so popular that people from all the way down in Washington, D.C. used to drive out to go to Meadowlark Inn to get some of their good food. So uh, at the time we moved here, where the TSC is right now, there used to be a baseball field. The Clark Griffith League used to have a baseball field there. And so baseball was played in the center, what is today the center of town. And if you think about prominent local names, I mentioned Titus, that was one of them, but Elgin's, Colhoss, Selby's, Glass, Willards, Halmos, Elgin's, these are all names. Some of them are still here today, but many of them, either a lot of the family has moved away or the patriarchs of the family have no longer live here. And there were a lot of farming families that were in the town today that were and still around today too, like the Butlers, the Spates, the Jamesons, Lewises, Allnuts. All those families played prominent roles in Poolesville. When we moved here, they were there then, and many of them are still there today. I attended school with a lot of those farming families, especially I remember the Lewis, Jay Lewis was one of the kids I attended school with. Ben Allnut, his farm is out today. It's a great place to get strawberries out.
Homestead,
Probably
it's
pick
called Homestead,
strawberries.
Homestead Farms. Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, Dad. Go ahead, Dad.
I just said, Allnuts today run Homestead Farm, which we all would sorely miss if it weren't here.
Right. There were also sizable numbers of African Americans in Poolesville High School when I was there. A lot of the families that live in places like Sugar Land, Jerusalem, Martinsburg, they all had kids who went to Poolesville High School. And when I attended it, it was about 600 kids. It was a junior senior high school, the only one still in the county at that point. And a lot of these families like the Grahams, the Johnsons, the Phillips, Hunneman, Jackson, Tibbs, some of those names are still around today, but many of them, their families have either moved away or the kids have moved away and basically the adults are left. But a lot of those kids were kids I went to school with. And on our basketball team, it was probably, I'd say 60% black and 40% white. So we had for a small school, we had a lot of diversity compared to what eventually happened in the school. So we had no magnet program in the Poolesville, of course, in those days, but yet we had a pretty diverse school student body. It was sort of, I think, Poolesville High School in those days was really more like a rural school in many areas in the West today. We had industrial arts programs. We had a barn where pigs were raised. We had a Future Farmers of America chapter. We had a Future Homemakers of America chapter. They had a furniture shop. And in fact, I still have 2 pieces of furniture from Poolesville High School that were made by students in the shop there. I was just talking the other day, I stopped by to see some friends of mine in our church who I also went to school with, Kathy and Eddie Cody. And Eddie actually made furniture in that shop. And he told me a story about the teacher who taught shop. His name was Frazier. And he had a brand new pickup truck. And he didn't want it to be damaged, but he also wanted to make sure the furniture that they were building got delivered. So he let some of the older students drive his truck with the furniture out to deliver furniture during the school day. I'm sure that would never happen today in Montgomery County schools. That would not be allowed, but he did that a lot apparently. They also had a car repair shop. Students learned to repair cars. And interesting to me was that a lot of the teachers that were there, and that's not a pattern you see today, were there for many, many years. Mrs. Deal, the English teacher, Dale Nestor, some of you know Dale. He's in Poolesville Memorial Church, but he was also a teacher at Poolesville High School for a long time. A guy named Saplee who did industrial arts, and I remember him. Howard Lyles, some of you may remember him. He did physical education, but Howard was among I think it was 8 blacks who integrated Poolesville High School in 1956. and he went on to become the athletic director for Poolsville High School. He's one of the most influential teachers I ever had. He was a fantastic man, a great athlete. And in fact, he actually tried out for the Baltimore Orioles and probably would have been able to make the team, but he decided he wanted to coach. Of course, it didn't make as much in baseball in those days as they do today, but Howard decided to coach instead. And I think I learned as much about life from Howard as I did from anybody, frankly. So, and a lot of these students that I played basketball with, like Gus Johnson, he's still around. He's in, I believe, in Dickerson. Gene Phillips, Spinny Johnson. A lot of those kids went on to Chesapeake College and helped them become one of the best basketball colleges in Maryland at one point. So a lot in Poolsville was different at the high school, as you can see, than it is today, where we've got, my class had 92 kids when it graduated. So a lot different than what we see today with Poolsville High School, which is not only much bigger, but a much different student body. And we no longer have things like the Future Farmers of America or FHA or those kind of clubs. We certainly don't have shop classes like we had in those days. I don't know, Dad, you and Mom are both involved in the school as PTA leaders and other ways. What, you have any other observations about Poolsville High School in those days?
Not particularly, but I did want to invite other people to enter into the conversation here. We live in such an interesting area, and all of us prize our good fortune to be living in the Poolsville area. And I think among the things that I think of is how the town has done a pretty good job of adapting itself into being a very good town for families, and that's paid off in a lot of ways. But particularly because I think the planning has been very good. The Planning Commission has really had a strong, made a strong impact on the community. And I know Lake Youth talked about making sure that the Planning Commission did is that there would be a park in every quadrant of the town, which I think has been totally fulfilled. Others, how about some comments on this town, this area?
One more story about Poolsville High School that, Dad, before we do that, the Future Farmers of America was a really important club in those days, as I mentioned. And I remember my junior year that on the senior skip day, the Future Farmers students somehow were able to release some pigs into the school. And I remember walking into the school and seeing the pigs, little piglets everywhere. So again, I don't think that's something you'd see in any high school in Montgomery County these days. So there are a lot of chat comments, and I did want to mention one thing. My brother-in-law, Teddy, is watching from North Carolina, and he said that Dale Nestor taught him the value of horticulture, and that Mistress Aplee helped him with engine repair. And Lyles, again, Howard Lyles was our physical education teacher. He was also the driver's ed teacher. And he said that Lyles let him drive the car. You weren't supposed to do that. So the driver's ed car. So anyway, that's Poolsville High School. Is there anything else that, I don't know if we're going to have questions at the end or we're going to have them during it. That's fine to have questions now, or we can have them at the end. That's fine too.
Link, we typically do them at the end, but if anybody wants to interject, that's totally fine too. I have one question that kind of pertains to the high school, just because this is where it was held, and I brought it up with somebody before, but I wanted to know when the community fair started. I remember that, early on in my time in Poolsville, and people would make, home canned relish and, different baked goods, and everything would be set up in the gym. I think it was the smaller gym, and, they were judged, and it was a whole different variety, but it really felt like, I don't know if the Future Farmers of America sponsored that, but I can remember that every year, and just what a great event to be able to go and look and, to submit stuff, but then to go see what other people have made. I just thought that was a great time. I don't know when that started or who was in charge of it, but I do remember it early on.
Well, I think that would have been Dale Nestor was riding herd on that program, or on those activities, I think.
Yeah, I don't remember the details of that. Somebody else on here might, I don't know if Joan does, or
Joan May.
it may be an FFA, FHA thing. I can't remember. I do remember going to it, but I don't remember when it started.
I don't know the year that it started, but I was there in the 50s and it was held then. And it was the Future Farmers and Homemakers that sponsored it.
Yeah. Yeah. So that we did want to talk about some other items too, because it's not just the Poolsville High School and our early days in different houses in Poolsville. It's also things like local government that Dad and I were both involved in, and things like politics in Montgomery County, which have changed dramatically since we first came out here in the 1960s. And I know I saw George Coakley on George's involved in the Planning Commission for a long time. So was I. And one of the points I wanted to make, and Dad touched on it, is that it's really hard to appreciate the impact of some of the work that some of the volunteer groups in Poolsville have done over the decades. But I know the planning commissions I served on, and I wasn't responsible for some of this. A lot of it was other members of the commission, and we had some good leaders of the planning commission when I was on it, have made huge differences in our lives in Poolsville. And Dad mentioned briefly that one of the ideas that came out of some of the early planning commissions I was on is something called the 4 quadrants plan. And the idea is, if you look at Poolsville, it looks sort of like it's got 4 arms. And the idea was to have a major park in every one of the quadrants, and obviously tot lots and things like that as well. But one major park connected with things like walkable paths and good walkable sidewalks. And although it's not completed, a lot of that has come true. And so you don't really appreciate sometimes how much some of this work the Planning Commission does in particular in a local government like this. And it's all volunteers, and it was done by experts. Although at various times we did have some people like Bill Moore. Some of you may know the Moore family, but Bill Moore was an excellent Planning Commission leader. He did have a background in engineering, and he knew a lot about how to do these kinds of things. He did some really excellent work, not only on master plans for the town, but also things like the infrastructure, the water and sewer system for the town. So a lot of these things over the years have helped make the town what it is today. In particular, I would point out that Wayland Commons and that whole effort to get that done in the 2004, 2010 timeframe. And I know George Coakley was involved in helping with a task force that was set up to try to come up with a place to locate a town hall. When I first got involved in town government, 1993, 94, I went to interview with then Mayor, he called himself Mayor Elgin, Charlie Elgin, who was the head of the town government then, the commissioners. And I wanted to be on the planning or the Parks Board. And I had been a staff director in the Congress for about 8 years at that point. I've been overseas for 3 or 4 years in New Zealand and helped run a investment that our company had made down there. And I was about 31, I guess. And I remember Charlie interviewing me, and at the end of the interview, he said I was too young, that I needed more seasoning. So I didn't get on the Parks Board the first time I tried. But I do remember that we were in the old, what's now the Homestead, I mean the Medley district, the old bank building. We rented that, the commissioners did, and that's where the first town hall was that I remember. We moved eventually. We had to rent space in the shopping center where the Dunkin' Donuts is now. We were there for quite a few years. And when I became a commissioner in 2004, based on work by the Planning Commission, and as I said, I know there was a task force that George was on, we worked to try to get a town hall and eventually negotiate an agreement to get Wayland Commons. And all of that has really paid off. And it wasn't, as I said, it wasn't really my work. A lot of it was people like Eddie Coleman, who was then the president of the commission, and Roy Johnson, who was on the commission. You know, a lot of good, thoughtful work that has led to some good things for the town. I think that, again, it's hard to appreciate sometimes the impact of some of this work, but it's been phenomenal, I think, for all of us. One of the other things that, and my dad can talk about this too, because he was in the PTA that I did for a long time, and Melissa was part of the PTA. I know a lot of you on this call have been, and we fought for since the 1990s to try to get the Poolsville High School modernized, and never did happen. It took until last year till we finally got a budget passed where we're modernized. So we started trying to do that back in the 1990s. And at that time, the school was already, parts were already 45 to 50 years old. So it's just taken a long time because our area really hasn't gotten as much attention as other parts of the county.
Yeah, when you say that, I think of folks who played a major role in making sure that we are trying to make sure that we got the facilities, the governmental support that we needed out here. And one name that hasn't come up that I would want to mention fondly, because she battled so hard for that, is Jane Hunter, who lives over on Hunter Road, appropriately named. And I remember, most of you know that farm that's is a kind of a replica of a ongoing dairy farm over on Wishy Road. Well, that came out of the negotiations that Jane undertook with the then county executive or county chairman. I don't know what the person was called at that time, but that building is being maintained by the county because, to be honest about it, almost as an offset to too many things being dumped out here, like ashes and leaves, and of course being near a power plant. So all those things figured. And another name that's got to get into the conversation, if we're talking about the area, of course, is the wonderful Jane Stearns, who, with a neighbor, established WOMCO, which became one of the key community organizations in the whole area. And the roots are very deep, and it's meant so much, I think, to so many people, not just the unfortunate among us, but to the whole community. Today, a thriving organization.
One of the other things that's changed a lot since we came to Poolsville was looking more broadly beyond just the town itself, but the political system situation in both Montgomery County and the state of Maryland changed a lot since we first moved here. And one example of that, and we'll show you this, a picture of this, is just beyond belief when I look at it now. But when my grandparents, mom and dad's parents, came out when we first moved out here in 1963, we took a tour of Washington with them. And we have a picture of us, all of us, standing on the White House lawn, literally right near the front portico of the White House. We got a picture. You can't get obviously anywhere close to the White House today, but if you want to think about how things have changed, that's probably one of the best examples I can think of it. And you'll see this picture at the end of our talk. But another thing that has changed, of course, is the political dynamics in the county and in the state. When we first moved here, Dad and I were both involved. I was young, but I was still involved. I still love politics. So we got involved in a number of different campaigns. And at that time, there were Republicans who actually had office in Montgomery County, like Gil Goody was the congressman, and he was a Republican. He became the Librarian of Congress. Connie Morella, of course, some of you know, was a teacher at Poolsville High School, but she was also a Republican. J. Glenn Bell was a senator for the state of Maryland, and Mac Mathias, another name you probably know. All of them were Republicans, and I'm not saying this to be partisan. I'm just saying that the political situation, both in the county and the state, has dramatically changed. Today, we don't have any Republicans at all in the council, for example, the county council. We did back then. We had a Republican, two different Republican county executives at various times, including James Gleason, who was a county executive for quite a long time. And all that's changed now. Pretty much all the office holders are Democrats. So not a comment at all again about partisan politics, just shows how much things have changed. I first got involved in politics because I got in the political campaign, a re-election campaign of J. Glenn Bell, who was a senator originally from Cumberland, Maryland. And I drove him all over the state before I think at that point it was 19 or 20. And I took him to different political activities and functions. And, he lost re-election, but it was really a good learning experience for me. So all of that has changed a lot. And it's, dynamic change in our political system totally. I don't know, Dad, if you had any other thoughts about that. You certainly were involved in a lot of political campaigns over the years.
Yeah, and that's, of course, in those years, political parties relied much more on local organizations. So if you were truly interested in politics, you could run, you might say, a minor party organization by lining up people, getting them to knock on doors and distribute flyers and all that. Quite a different political climate than today, which is more down, up, down, top to bottom than today.
Mom, did you want to talk a little bit about your shop? You started your shop in 1978, and you had 4 different locations over the years, starting off when you were at what today, I forgot who owned that house at that time, but at that time it was a commercial building. It's a private house now, but it's right across the street from what used to be the First National Bank, across from Liberty gas station. It's a white house now, but it was a commercial building in those days. You were in that building along with a guy who had a carpet store and some other. It was sort of like a mini mall in those days. There was no other store around it, but your first shop was there, wasn't it?
Well, the first location was the Hoskinson House.
Yeah.
And it's next to St. Peter's.
Dad, I can't hear Mom very well. Maybe her microphone has to be closer.
No, you can
So off tonight, but it was the Hoskinson House next to St. Peter's on the 2nd floor.
Yeah.
And there was a short time in the old town hall on Willard Road.
Right.
And that's about it.
But then you were at White Store, what used to be White Store, where Kaleva is now.
Yeah.
And then you moved to the your last store was in the
Frederick Pool
House. That was it. That was your last job.
Next to Bassett's. Yeah.
When you started, though, the big thing in crafts, wasn't it macrame was the big deal? And I don't think people even know what macrame is nowadays.
Macrame and then all kinds of
But you
crafts
did.
like that. But then we got into more stuff than that. So.
ceramics, Christmas trees, they turned out by the hundreds, I think.
Yeah, your microphone needs to be closer again, Dad. I still can't hear you guys very well.
The ceramics, ceramic Christmas trees, she must have made, I don't know, hundreds over the years with little lights on and lit. It was so beautiful at Christmas time.
We had craft classes and paint projects, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts. We had school class groups come in and church groups. Just, it's always somebody knocking on the door to have a class.
Yeah. There was also, you also did silk flowers. That was a big craft for a while. And ceramics was probably the biggest one.
Ceramics, flower making, stitch, macrame, paint projects. We worked with the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts and church groups. We were always busy.
Yeah. And I think you had 2 employees too over the years, your daughter Becky and your daughter Tammy.
Mhm.
And your daughter Becky in particular caught the craft bug, and now I think a lot of her kids are into crafts as well. So
Yeah.
yeah. and it became a shop. I think a lot of people said this, that was sort of a place for people to go to lean on your shoulder, talk about anything they wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
I remember going there many times when people were just there to just have somebody to talk to. So,
So there's a big need. There's a big need for that in this world.
yeah. Yeah, today, your shop was altogether, you had it for 42 years. I think at the time you closed it down, it was the longest running shop in Poolesville. And I was just talking to John Spielman, who now owns the hardware store, yesterday. He said that his shop has now had its 35th anniversary, so he's going to try to beat your record. But I think the guy that had it before him was Dee Dee Dietrich, and I think Dee Dee had it, I mean, Bill Bliss, and I think Bill Bliss had it for a long time too. I forgot how many years he had it, but so
Sometimes people would just come in to talk and tell me their problems too.
yeah.
The listening ear is what she was known as.
Yeah.
I had 42 years.
Yep. So I think those are the main points we wanted to cover tonight. I don't know if anybody had, I know you had the slideshow. We could show you some pictures I thought might be useful, interesting too, real quickly. We can just tell you what they are.
I will get it shared now. Can everyone see okay?
Oh
Yeah,
my
this is obviously mom and dad's wedding day. Dad's brother is the man to his left there, the second man down. And what was that, Dad? It was in 1952, I think.
I'm going to be sure I answer it right. Yes, that's it was up.
Okay. And mom and dad were Midwesterners and from Keokuk, Iowa, which is the southeast corner and of Iowa, which is where the Iowa River and the Mississippi River come together. Block 26 on the Mississippi. Okay, next. Oh, this is the picture I wanted to show you. This is the White House. We're right in front of the White House. This is 1963. Those people in the picture, I am the person to your extreme right, I guess. That's my sister Becky, my sister Tammy down, the small little girl there below that. My mom has Francie in her arms. Those are mom and dad's grandparents behind them. And then my brother is right in front of my grandma Hoeing. So, and that's 63. So that just shows you how much things have changed since we moved to Poolesville and this area in 1963. That's Franny and I just wanted to make sure I got her in because she's been an important part of my life the whole time. And she is a butler, and the Butlers are a longtime family here. The Tituses and the Butlers are intertwined to some degree, but those families go way back here.
I'm going to flip back. I think there were a couple more at the beginning.
Okay.
Here we go.
Okay, yeah. The picture to the right is mom and dad holding me. That was in Princeton, New Jersey. Dad was at graduate school in Princeton, so I was actually born in Princeton. And he will tell you this story is apocryphal, but anybody who knows Dad can believe that it's probably true. When mom was pregnant, her mom came out to be with mom. And her mom was a force of nature. I'll say it that way. She was I loved the woman, but she was a pretty tough character. And mom went into labor. So grandma went to the Princeton Library to find dad. And she started knocking on the cubicles where people were studying. She finally got to dad's cubicle and said, "Ray, you need to come out because your baby's being born." And supposedly dad said, "Could I just finish this last chapter?" So he says it's apocryphal, but I kind of believe it's true. And the picture to the left, of course, is mom and dad in their youth. Mom in her bobby socks, and that was again when they were young. So long history the family has had out there, but also here. Most of our relatives were in the Midwest, so we didn't have any relatives out here when we moved. So.
I think those were all of the pictures.
That's all of them. Thank you. Anyway, this has
Shall we
been,
start taking questions? I see a
might-
few in the chat if you guys are ready for questions.
I was going to say one thing, mention one thing maybe about Poolsville. I think there was a period in our history not too long ago, without getting too specific about the dating or any individuals involved, when there was a need to change the community dialogue and the flow of information, and the need for some kind of publication to kind of inform and maybe unify the public around public issues that were important to the town's growth, all of progressive nature. And that is, for example, not for example, but that is, that need was fulfilled by the Monocle, Montgomery Monocle, which of course Randy Davis and John Clayton undertook. I think it's been a very healthy influence on the town. I also had the great pleasure for 5 years, 2002 to 2007, to run something called the Poolsville Online newspaper, which by its very nature indicates that you had to go online to read it. And I was always pleased because we almost always got more than 2,000 different viewers. So where some of those came from, I don't know. Maybe they just were people who were looking for a humorous publication. I don't know. But that was a period of time before, I think, a period in our history, rather, before, we had, were adequately sharing opinions and progressing in the right direction.
we first moved here, the newspaper of record in Montgomery County was called the Montgomery County Sentinel. It's long since been out of business. Then the Gaithersburg Gazette, which had local chapters, including the Poolsville Gazette, were all part of the same company. They went out of business. So there aren't too many local papers anymore. So we're really fortunate to have the Monocle, because it's at least a place where people, for example, who can't get on the internet or don't know how to use it very well, they can certainly have the newspaper to see what's going on in town. So it's a good thing to have that. You don't have that in too many other towns. I just got one other note I wanted to make. Teddy Burris is my brother-in-law, and he's on the chat putting some things out. And one thing he mentioned in terms of Mom's shop was that she used to sell wood crafts that Horace Burris made. And Horace Burris was his grandfather, Teddy's grandfather. And he got the scrap wood that he used for that from Watkins Cabinet Company. And some of you know that. That's out in Barnesville. It's still there. So.
Well, I don't have a question, but I would like to say, we've been in Poolsville since 1973, and I am not aware of any 3 people who have done so much for the town of Poolsville and continue to do that. And I have, for that entire period, been very impressed with the Hoewings family.
Well, George, coming from you, that's a high compliment, because you did some amazing work on the planning commission, I must say. And I think everybody appreciates what you've done and the commissioners have done over the years.
Well, I'm not sure about that.
Oh, I am. I am. I was the commissioner, so I get the benefit of some of that.
Would you like to
Oh,
start
wait,
taking questions? I definitely see a couple in the chat.
Well,
Let her do.
The first one that I see is, can you elaborate on the dairy farm on Wash Road? Is it open to the public for tours?
I think you're talking, Dad, about the farm where the Sugarloaf Citizens Association meets. aren't you?
Exactly. It's
Yeah, it actually is. And they actually have tours of it, and they also have days when the Circular Citizens Association opens it for different plant exchanges and things like that. So yeah, you can go see it. The barn there has been transformed into a nice meeting center. So, but it's not an operating farm anymore. It's not like an old farm that they tried to preserve. It's now used as a meeting center.
I see another question that asks, how did Mr. and Mrs. Hoeing meet?
Well, should I tell the whole truth? I guess I have to tell the truth. My wife, Reva, was in the, what did they call it? You were with the band or the cheerleaders? What was it? The band, Carthage College. And both of us attended Carthage College. That was a small school in liberal arts college in Illinois. And I went with my girlfriend. Reva was in the band. On the way home, I brought the two home, except I let the girlfriend off. And that's when our courtship began, because I took Reva home last.
So
You knew what you were doing, didn't you?
I never let him go.
I offer absolution.
I see a question that jokes, did the old girlfriend hunt you down?
She hunted me down.
Oh dear.
Feel free to unmute and ask any questions you have at this point as well, or if you don't want to unmute, feel free to send them in the chat.
Well, I just want to say something. I'm Jan Deloria, and I moved here to Poolesville in 1984, and I discovered Reva's shop. You were in where Kaliva is now when I moved here. And my daughters and I just went crazy. I mean, we did every ceramic you had and had them fired, and I still have some of them in my house. So thank you, Reva. That was a really good introduction to Poolesville.
Thank you. I love my shop. I miss it.
I can imagine.
I can say that all of the family members that supported Mom in the shop have mixed emotions about that, because she moved 4 times, and you can't imagine how much work it is to move a shop. All of the different stuff that she had, the buttons. I mean, it was just a major undertaking. So the last time she moved, all of us said, you know, Mom, I think this is the last time. I don't think we can do this again. So, but it was a great shop. It was a lot of fun to be part of it.
Nice.
My kids all went to that shop, and they all participated in the craft classes Mom had, and it was a great place, especially making Christmas ornaments. That was a lot of fun.
Mhm.
42 years.
Yeah.
Wow. I was curious what your experience was like building your home.
Well, when I say building a home, I'm not talking about literally my building it. As Link would be the first to tell you, I can't even I can't even tell you how to use a square. So we had it built by a local builder. Well, actually, it was a man out of what was it, Link? Damascus, right? Or where did JD?
PG Burdett, his company has long since gone out of business, but yeah, it was a local builder called PG Burdett in Damascus.
Kind of an interesting sideline. We didn't know what we wanted, but he was such a great custom builder. He took a set of plans, and I remember particularly Reva, because she had all the good ideas about things to include on the actual building, as opposed to what the creator of the blueprint had in mind. That was a fascinating exercise. So, for example, those people who love to paint might be glad that they paint the walls of their clothes closets with, but the idea that he came up with, or maybe probably Reba, was to panel it so you didn't have to paint it every 10 years. So anyway, it was a great exercise, and it worked out very well for us, and we're very pleased with it.
I mentioned Lemmy Graham had a house next to Dad, an African-American man. He never married, and I think it was 88 when he died. We took, and when he passed away, Dad actually bought the property where Lemmy Graham's house was. And so that house was torn down. And if you look behind Dad above his head there, and also the beams there you can see in the house, those are actually the outside parts of the old parts of the old house that we took and made paneling out of. So it's kind
And
of
to go what
that house is Lemmy Graham's house. The paneling behind you is from his house. So,
and to go one step further, that old house was built in the 19th century. The 19th century. So that little bit of paneling dates back to 1890 or something. So kind of like that as an aspect of the home ties it very well to this earth around us.
one other story that shows you something about farming too in those days. I was, I think, 16, and I wanted a summer job that summer, so I decided to sign on. I didn't know Franny. I was just starting to get to know her, but she told me her dad needed help getting hay put up. So I'd never done that kind of work. So I went and worked with her father baling hay on his property. And if you've ever gone down White's Ferry on the left-hand side, if you go past my parents' house, you'll see there's a long straightaway. It's the only house you can really see that well, really close to the road. It's a white square farmhouse. That was their home, and that was their farm.
With the windmill. The windmill was the thing.
Yeah, there's a windmill there. Anyway, I went down to work that summer, and I worked with her brother. She has a twin brother, George. He still lives in the area too. But so we both went out there, 60-year-olds wanting to have our bodies bronzed and tanned. So we didn't have any shirts on, just had short pants and boots and gloves. That's it. And by 3 o'clock, we were ready to pass out. Both of us were so tired we couldn't stand up. And her dad was in his 60s then, probably. And he came over and he was still working like a champ, did not stop. And we were both like, how can he do this? And he said, you guys are not dressing the right way. And we said, what are you talking about? He said, you can't let the sun touch your skin. When it does, it makes you hot. He had on a long sleeve shirt, bib overalls, and a hat and gloves. He was totally covered. He said, I'm air conditioned because all this sweat's next to my body, but whenever the wind blows, I'm nice and cool. The sun doesn't get to me. You guys got to stop showing off. So I learned something valuable about how to be a real farmer that day, I'll tell you.
Link, don't forget to mention your probably 30 plus years of cooking food at the St. Mary's picnics,
Oh yeah.
dinners.
Yeah, it was when I got married. I got married in the Catholic Church. Franny's family are longtime Catholics, so I never converted, but I agreed to raise my kids as Catholics. So I got actively involved in the church, and we were all involved in cooking as most of you have probably gone to it, the chicken barbecue, and then of course they had the ham and turkey as well. But one of the things about the chicken flicking that I'm glad you raised that, George. I forgot about it. That it's funny is that in the old days, the chicken flickers, it used to be led by Franny's father, George Butler. And he had a 1966 Pontiac with a huge trunk. He used to come up there with his trunk full of ice and different kinds of alcohol. And they would have that thing like a little bar out there for the guys that did the chicken flicking. And that kept them going all day long. So he used to tell me about that when I was dating Franny.
I see a question in the chat that says, do you have photos of the Graham house?
I do. I don't think we took any pictures, did we, Dad, of the Graham house?
We did not, unfortunately.
Yeah, we didn't. I know. It's too bad because it was just I guess it was probably maybe three bedroom at the most, or 2 bedrooms.
Probably two.
Yeah, 2. No water. Had a little kitchen part of it on the back of it, and a little porch on the back of it. I remember that. Yeah, it was amazing. He worked down at the Butler farm for many years, and when I saw his headstone, I've got a picture of that. I wish I would have sent that to you. It was up there at the cemetery where the Martinsburg Church is. The Martinsburg Church that you all probably see on Whites Ferry Road is it's a historic area because the Martinsburg area was settled by free blacks and former slaves after the Civil War. The original church wasn't there. It was actually near where, if you know where Caleva is, it's near Caleva. That's where the original church was. And the cemetery for the original church is up there. You can't see a lot of it anymore because it's all overgrown with woods and so forth. But there's a part of it that's still used today. And when I went up there, I found Lemmy Graham's headstone. And unbeknownst to me, as I said, he died when I think he was 88. He was a World War I vet. It was a private in World War I. So who would have known? He never talked about himself, so I didn't know much about him. But
Do we have any more questions? Feel free to unmute.
About that Martinsburg community. We've had him on and talked about the church and the history of that area. So that's been really interesting to hear. But I also want to co-sign on what George said, that ever since I've moved here in 1980, I've always heard the Hoewing name, all around town. And it's such a blessing that we've had your family and, your generations just being part of this town, with your shop, Riva, which I remember taking my daughter in when she was young to pick out little crafts to do, to all of you and your involvement with the community. And Link, I know you put many hours in with fair access and, trying to get us a better high school and a senior center and, everything that the rest of the county seems to have that, we're kind of the stepchild over here, but, it takes a lot of community support. So I really appreciate everything you all have done over so many years. It takes a lot of energy to stick with that, but we really, really appreciate that.
thank you. Well, I got to say, the reason I think we've been successful with the Fair Access Committee, though, is although part of it is the fact that we have a committee that's 100% focused on just not letting council members or Board of Education members forget about us. We constantly email them and meet with them. But a bigger, I think, reason that we've had success is the community. We had a number of muster campaigns, email campaigns, and I know when I met with council members, they noticed that our citizens were sending them notes about doing something about the high schools. That helped immensely. So I got to thank all of you too for getting engaged because that really helped a lot. We still got a ways to go. As all of you know, we don't have a new gym in the new high school yet, and we're still pushing for that, which to me is still unacceptable. And we don't have a wellness center, which I think really need. High schools now, I think, need wellness centers, which are mental health centers that a lot of high schools have now, and they help a lot with kids who face so many pressures today. Not only school pressures, but family pressures and other things. So we're going to keep battling on that, and also for a community center, because again, if you look at a map of Montgomery County, you'll see community centers everywhere, including Clarksburg, which is a relatively new community. They're building a community center there too. So a lot more work to be done, but some progress. At least this year, we finally got the school budgeted, so that's good.
When you mention community centers, that just raises in my mind the value of the services of the Poolsville Area Senior Center.
Yeah.
Really is important to a lot of us that they have succeeded so well in their program.
Yeah,
For
no,
regular citizens in Poolsville, what would be your biggest recommendation of how to get involved in helping bring about these changes, like a community center?
the best way really is to go on the Poolsville government's website, and you'll see a section of that has the Fair Access Committee's presentations, white papers that we've done and things like that. you can actually sign up for email notices from the committee whenever we need help. And also we send out updates periodically of what's going on. That's probably one of the best ways you can help us to get on our mailing list, so we can let you know when we need support at the council or the Board of Education.
Do you have any more questions or comments?
I have a comment if I could.
Hey, sure.
For those of you that I've not met, I have the privilege of being the pastor of Poolsville Memorial United Methodist Church, and I'm thankful to be here. I also have the privilege of being able to call Team Hoeing my parishioners. And I'm very thankful for that. Today I celebrate my 3rd anniversary in Poolsville. No gifts are required, but I appreciate your applause. And it did not take me long to realize that Team Hoeing were the exemplars for what it means to love community. And I'm thankful for their witness in that way. And Poolsville, I know you recognize that you are very blessed to have them in your midst, but it didn't take a newcomer very long to figure that out.
Thanks, Tim. Well, I hope this has been informative. Certainly we enjoyed doing it. And boy, it made me think back about a lot of things that I hadn't thought about for so long. So, and it also spurred me to go by and see old friends of mine, Kathy and Eddie Cody, who I haven't seen for a while. And Kathy's not feeling as well as she would like to. So it was great to see them. And both of them went to high school with me. So it was great to catch up with them.
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody, for coming tonight. And as so many of you have said, it's really true and so amazing the impact that your family has had on Poolsville. So many of the fixtures that I grew up with younger in Poolsville, I didn't even know how great the impact. And it was so amazing hearing about all of the stories and behind the scenes. I really want to thank you guys for your presentation tonight, and I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I did and learned something new. Of course, if you think of any questions later, you can always email us info@poolsvilleseniors.org and we can pass them along. If you'd like to unmute or turn on your camera to say goodbye, now is the time. If you're joining us on Facebook Live, please leave a like and comment. We'd like to thank Ray, Riva, and Link for this presentation, as well as our ongoing sponsors and private contributors that help us keep our programs going, because we love putting them on for you so much. If you enjoyed tonight's presentation, we'll be back next week with Suzanne Talia and her presentation, How I Found Out I Was Related to Abraham Lincoln. So you can register at our website, poolsvilleseniors.org, for more info. And thank you all so much for joining us tonight and attending.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
you.
Team Hoeing.